Okay, so we just talked about having a flat tax versus a progressive tax system. Um, there's a little bit of a problem with the progressive tax system that we just developed, and you may not realize it until we actually look at something for a second. Um, so let's say I have an income of $40,000. Okay, under this tax system, so we're gonna make less than 40,000, less than or equal to $40,000. We'll pay 10% in taxes. If you make more than $40,000, you're gonna pay 20%. So let me just put in less than or equal to $40,000. Okay, so that means if we make $40,000, we pay 10% of the tax, and now we're good. We're at $4,000. Imagine for a second I made one more dollar. I made $40,001. Boop. Income tax now jumps from $4,000 to $8,000 just because I made one more dollar. That doesn't seem fair. The reason for that is because of how we made this rule up. It said if we make less than or equal to $40,000, we're going to pay 10% on the entire income. Versus if we make $40,000, we're going to pay 20% on the entire income. Just to illustrate how unfair this is, I made two blocks. One is $40,000 and one is $40,001. So this is 10%, okay? This is my 10% of my 40,000, okay? That's my 4,000 bucks. But if I make one additional dollar, I now have to pay 20% of my entire block, which would be about $8,000, a little bit more than $8,000. That's not really fair. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, you know what? Instead of doing that, what we're going to do is say, okay, instead of doing that, what we're going to say is, you know what? If you made $40,001, all right, you're still going to pay 10% of the first 40,000. So you're still going to pay 10% of that first 40,000. So you're only going to pay this much, okay? But what you're going to do instead is on that extra dollar that you made, so we made a little extra dollar over here, I'm going to make you pay 20% of that extra dollar. So over here, I'm going to make you pay 20% of this extra money. So that would be a little sliver. I'm going to make you pay only 20%. I'm going to make you pay 20% of the extra money. Whoa. Whoopsie, sorry. I'm going to make you pay 20% of the extra. And that's what's going to happen. That's what our tax system is based on. So if you're going to make you're going to tax the money based on how much you made after a certain point. So to get rid of the unfairness, we're going to build a different progressive tax system. So here it is. I'm going to call it a more complex progressive tax system. So on the first 40,000 we make, first 40,000 anyone makes, he or she will be taxed 10% of that. Then on the next $60,000, for example, anyone makes, he or she will be taxed 15% of that amount if they make it. And then after that amount, you will be taxed 20%. So it eliminates the possibility of going up by a dollar, like in this example. Whoops, excuse me. It eliminates if you go up by a dollar here, you pay 8,000 instead of 4,000 for someone who made only 40,000. It's like just keep the dollar, I'll pay 4,000 in taxes. It eliminates that. So here's how we're going to do it. This is a little tricky. We're going to set up almost an amortization table. Okay? So for example, over here I have my what's called a marginal rate. So those tax rates that we discussed are called marginal rates. So this is the marginal rate. This is a marginal rate. So you're making 10%. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to highlight it. you're doing 10% of the first $40,000. That's a marginal tax rate. Then we're going to do 15% of the next 60 grand. By the way, giving you $100,000. Okay? And after that amount, we're going to tax you 20% on anything else that you make. All right? So if I think about what's happening, on the first $40,000 anyone makes, he or she's taxed 10% of that. On the next $60,000, meaning if you made up to $100,000 total, you will be taxed 15% of the next $60,000. And after that amount, you're going to be taxed 20%. So those are called marginal rates. The 20, the 15, and the 10. And I'm going to call this the boundary. So meaning that if I make $1, I'm going to be taxed 10% up to $40,000. Then I'm going to be into the next tax bracket. Some people call this a tax bracket, this 15%. They say you're in the 15% tax bracket. And that's going to be $40,000. That's going to be my boundary. And then my next boundary is going to be $100,000. That's going to put me in the 20%. So let's say, for example, I made $150,000. All right? So my 20% tax rate, my 20% rate, I have a certain amount of money that's going to be taxed. I'm going to take this value that I started with, 150, and I'm going to subtract the boundary number, meaning how much money did I make above $100,000? So if I subtract them, it'll say, oh yeah, you made $50,000 above $150,000. So on that $50,000, I'm going to be taxed 20%. That's the amount of money that I made above the boundary. So my tax now is I'm going to apply 20% times $50,000. And therefore, I got taxed $10,000. Now, I've only been taxed on $50,000. I made $150,000. So now I have to think about how much money is going to be left to tax. I have to now tax what's left over. So I have to take my $150,000 and subtract $50,000. And that will give me the amount of money that's left over to tax. In other words, I have $100,000 left to tax. So, back to here. I already taxed the top $50,000. I have $100,000 left. I need to get the amount that's going to be taxed at 15%. It's not going to be the full $100,000. It's going to be $100,000. It's going to be only the amount of $100,000 that I made after the $40,000. So again, I can take my amount that's left over and subtract the $40,000. And now I get $60,000. $60,000 is going to be taxed at 15%. So you can think about what should go here and what should go there. So I want you to think about that. So I'm not going to reveal the formulas. I actually want you to build them in. But right now I have $9,000 in taxes and $40,000 left over to tax. So I did my 15% of my $60,000 to get my $9,000, and I want you to think about how we're going to get the $40,000 left. So now we have our amount to be taxed. So before, if we remember, I took D12, which was the amount that we had minus the boundary. So we'll do the same thing here. We're going to take 40,000 and subtract the boundary, which is 39,999. Fine enough. And then I have my tax and my amount left over to tax. So I'll do this one with you. So I have I'm going to take my 10% times my $30,000. There's my tax, and my amount left over would be this number minus the amount taxed. We have $1 left over. Not a big deal. Okay? And now I can add up my total tax bill. I can sum up the total tax. And I tax $23,000. There's one little problem with this if I wanted to change this number. Watch what happens. Let's say I made it $90,000. Whoops, excuse me. $90,000. If you notice, if I make it $90,000, in here, I get a negative $10,000. That's because this number was below this first boundary, so I'm getting a negative here. I don't want to do that. So what I want to do is, if this number happens to be negative, I don't want it to be there. I want it to actually be 0. So what I'm going to do is very easy. I'm going to put a max formula in here. I'm going to say I want the maximum of this value or 0. And what that means is that if this number, B9 minus G11, is less than 0, then I'm just going to report back 0. So I'm going to have max. I'm going to do it here as well. And I'm going to do it here as well. Okay. So now you're going to construct your own sheet, and then you're going to be able to answer questions that come up in the quiz. All right, thanks, guys.